Succession Season 4, Episode 7, Tailgate Party is over, but we are just getting started here on Post Show Recaps. That's right, everyone. It's the Succession podcast here on Post Show Recaps, where we are breaking down the HBO show's final season, episode by episode and podcast by podcast. You can get commercial-free versions of the Succession podcast when you sign up at patreon.com/Post Show Recaps at any level. That's patreon.com/Post Show Recaps at any level for ad-free versions of the Succession podcast. Hello, everybody. I am Josh Wigler. Today, we are talking about Succession Season 4, Episode 7, Tailgate Party. I am joined here by my two co-hosts, Jess Sterling and Grace Leader. VIPs in the house.
I woke up on the right side of the coffin today, so I'm doing well.
It's a good way to wake up, Grace Leader.
There's only one India?
There's only... Yes. Breaking news here on this episode of Succession. For those of you who have never seen a map before, very big news here happened
I gotta tell Christopher Columbus.
Succession this week. Well, for those of you who don't know whether or not Christopher Columbus is alive anymore.
Got bad news for you.
Got some bad news
or
for
good
you.
news for some people.
Yeah,
well.
that's true.
He is hanging out in hell with Logan Roy. Anyway, here we are hanging out on youtube.com/Post Show Recaps live after the final season's 7th episode of Succession, Tailgate Party. Just 3 episodes left. But of course, we're very excited because this is not the only podcast we will be doing here on this week of Succession. Of course, it's the live recap. It's our first shot here. I'm coming to you from New York, which is a pretty happening town famously. But of course, Grace is in Canada and Jess is elsewhere in New York. And cool things happen there. Nothing happens in New York that doesn't happen anywhere else, Grace, is what I've heard.
Yeah, you tried Singapore? You tried those? You tried other places other than New York?
Singapore is awesome. I was like, when Matt was saying, I was like, there are other cool places.
There are other cool cities.
Plenty of cool places out here, but the coolest place on Sunday nights is postshowrecaps.com/YouTube if you want to watch the live breakdowns of each and every episode of Succession, especially while we still got them. Only 3 more after this week. It's getting really close down the wire here. It's like we're on the night before Election Day or something like that. Kind of feels like a momentous occasion. Of course, the podcast party shall continue tomorrow with the deep dive into episode 7 of the final season with Grace and Dr. Amanda. Grace, I'm sure we've got a fun one lined up. Any details you'd like to share?
I believe we're going to be joined as planned by Alexander Chester.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah.
This is Scar.
Yeah, Alexander Chester Skarsgård.
The Alexander Chester Skarsgård of podcasting
right.
showing up on the deep dive. That's going to be a must-listen occasion. I will be then getting together with Latanya Starks for the Versus podcast. This week, we actually have an episode of Yellow Jackets to talk about. So we improvised last time around. I thought we had a good time. We'll be talking about Tailgate Party compared to episode 6 of Yellow Jackets, because now we are off by 1 each. And who is all I will say about that, and I'm glad that we are talking about a different thing. I will be talking about Succession as well with the great Rob Sesternino in a couple of days as well. We'll actually be recording a little bit earlier than normal. I think that podcast should drop by like Tuesday afternoon, Wednesday morning or such, so you can look forward to that. Then we'll do it all over again at the end of the week. We've got the wrap-up show. We will once again be live. postshowrecaps.com/YouTube records Friday afternoons on the East Coast if you want to get involved in all of that. If you want to just make sure you're never missing any of these episodes, even if you can't make them live, subscribe to the podcast. That's a great way to do this. postshowrecaps.com/Succession. That's our RSS link when you search by URL. You could also just search Post Show Recaps Succession wherever you get.
If you're in India, make sure you've subscribed twice so that our numbers line up.
We'll take the stats however we can get them, Grace.
Put them up.
Sing the quiet part out loud on that, but we'll take the numbers however we can get them. How about a quick plot recap, Jess? Will you take it however you can get it?
I will take it however I can get
Okay, I wrote this up quickly. Hopefully it makes sense. Here we go. Season 4, Episode 7, Tailgate Party. It's the eve before the election, and all through the house, many creatures are stirring, especially the scorpion. The Roys gather together with 40 or so of the most powerful people in America before either Daniel Jimenez or Jared Mencken becomes the next president of the United States. These are the only 2 options on the field. I am certainly not leaving anyone out. Hosted by the newly reconciled Shiv and Tom, the party is a night of the long knives indeed, with some stab wounds more subtle than others. Kendall and Roman take the occasion to plot against Matsson and raise ethical concerns about his acquisition of Waystar, but Matsson himself is surprisingly on hand to counter their glad-handing, thanks to a tip from his Waystar insider, Siobhan. Shiv tells Matsson she's only willing to betray her family for a very, very, very important job. Yes, that's 3 varies. Matsson's answer there is less than satisfactory, but at least it's more palatable than Gojo's inflated numbers. Turns out the size of Matsson's actual subscriber base only makes sense if there are 2 Indias, and as of press time, there is still only the one. The buzz becomes an open secret at the party, with Kendall seeing a path towards pulling the quote-unquote reverse Viking, pillaging Matsson's village by way of Waystar buying Gojo. It's a move that makes Kendall's previous moonwalk look like a trip to space camp. But can it be done? 3 episodes left before the rocket takes off or explodes in flight. Speaking of explosions, let's close on Tom and Shiv. After Shiv spends the entire night lightly implying that Tom is going to lose his job at ATN once Matsson takes over Waystar, the couple break out into their most ruthless, brutally honest battle yet. They tell each other harsh truths that are pretty impossible to take back, with Shiv ending the episode by agreeing with her brothers on at least one thing. Language alert, folks. Fuck Tom. The episode ends with a deeply sleepy and deeply distraught Tom lying in bed, tucked, if not the other thing. Anyway, that's this week's episode of Succession. That's what we've got here at the Tailgate Party, Jess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, the headline is the Tom and Shiv stuff. Like, it is a masterclass performance. I loved seeing them have, again, we said like, oh, the most recent episode, that conversation they had, the most honest they've ever been with each other. And I'm like, okay, scratch that. Nope, now we have the new most honest conversation they've ever had with each other. And yeah, I mean, I'm not, I said this in season 3, the political stuff doesn't intrigue me as much. I could have gone without ever seeing Nate again, and my life would have been fine.
I'm really glad that the final season of Succession, Grace, is giving us exactly what we want. More Nate scenes.
More Nate.
Definitely listening to the fans out there. Jesse Armstrong.
I did at least like Nate being like, I won't drink too much of your wine, and Tom being like, drink as much as you want, and then being like, what an a-hole.
Yeah. Tom was excited to see Nate at the very least. So good for Tom. Seems like some growth, or maybe not really much at all. As Grace, this does end up being a pretty bleak episode for Tom and Shiv. Maybe the bleakest episode for Tom and Shiv, which is so weird because last week maybe was the high point of their relationship.
I know this season is certainly being like, it's really a roller coaster ride, but just like only ups and downs. Just like there's no it's just like, if you're up the one episode, you're down the next one. I thought the fight was really well acted. I think it's really intense. Kudos to their soundproofing, that nobody in the party seems to have heard them yelling on the balcony.
It's like the Ace Ventura window,
that's
where
right.
like no one could hear him when he closed it.
I definitely think this is an episode that I thought I don't think I'm super high on it coming out of it. I definitely feel like I need to rewatch it. I think I had the same I had a bit of the same feeling last week. We got a few things that we hadn't seen before, which was last week, like Logan just showing up like like in front of a green screen. I was like, that's
which
really
they
weird.
did again if you started with previously on. And I once again
threw me off again.
Yeah, I was like,
it gave me chills a little bit.
At this point now, anytime you see Logan Roy, even if it's in a commercial, it's like,
Yeah. But I do think for me, I feel like I've seen them fight before, and I feel like in a way that I thought was more Succession-y, and I think that's where I'm like having to sit with this fight, in that they are so actually honest with each other. They are saying things that like, if there's a language to the show that is typically like, there's even some of it in the conversation. Like Shiv says, it's so effing flat, I think is something she says, which is like, you kind of just like, you're like, I don't really know what that means, but I get the vibe of it, Shiv, and you're along with it. But so much of this fight is so them shooting directly at each other instead of these barbs. And I feel like that's so unusual for the show that I feel like I need to like watch this episode again to get into like that like finally, I think after like 4 seasons of this show,
right,
the veneer that this like world that they live in, right, this bubble where Tom is saying, there's 40 of the most powerful people in the world and you're walking around telling them what to think and do. It's finally like cracking, at least between these two these two people.
Yeah, is the veneer cracking because of Bitey? Because they're just like
Yeah, they've been
fighting
gnawing
too
on each
hard
other's
into
arms.
Truly, though, Jess, after Bitey last week, nothing could hurt more, or so we thought, between Tom and Shiv.
Yeah, I just agree with you, Grace, because we've seen other episodes break format this season too, right? Like the Logan death episode to me felt very unsuccession-y, but I still loved it. This argument felt like it was 4 seasons in the making. It felt like people who had finally reached their limits for various reasons, right? Tom is exhausted, right? He says it all episode long. We see him yawning all the time
He goes,
because
I'm
of the
sleepy. I'm
yeah,
really
he's
tired."
Father Sexmas, and he's been having too much sex with Shiv, and
Uh-huh.
he's tired, and he knows that he is like up to get his head chopped off, like by
Yeah.
his own wife saying this all night long, and he's reached his limit. And so I guess I saw their, as much as their communication style was very different than what we usually see from them. I mean, given what they're both going through individually and as a couple, it made sense to me that they would finally yell at each other, right? They've both reached the boiling points in their relationship.
They achieved climax, yes, in terms of the rage between the two of them. I don't know if you read the sexts, but the sexts were pretty intense in that scene back and forth. I don't think that I could
right
repeat
before they
them
fired hundreds of people.
on a YouTube. Yeah, right before firing hundreds
I
of
need
people.
the gif of Tom doing the like, wah! Like
Monster, absolute monster. I just think it is really compelling that here in this episode, just one episode after we saw them really make it, we really thought that this was finally it. Shiv and Tom operating on the same frequency, Grace. It goes the totally opposite way. And given sort of the whiplashiness of this, wouldn't be surprised if episode 8 begins with them waking up in the morning and just having coffee with each other and pretending.
Yeah, renewing
none of
their
this ever
vows,
happened.
maybe
Yeah.
even.
Mhm.
Yeah, tomorrow.
Yeah.
On election day.
Wouldn't be surprised.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about Mattson and his numbers, because I think that that's another really big deal about what's going on here in this week's episode of Succession. Lucas Mattson showing up into the final season of Succession as the final boss, except it turns out that maybe he has been using cheat codes. So, Jess, what are we thinking about this revelation about Mattson, and what's worse, the inflated numbers in India or sending the bricks of frozen blood to Ebba?
I mean, obviously the bricks are worse on a human level. But this is exactly what I was worried about, right? We talked a little bit in this week's wrap up about Shiv. I gave her a really high score, but I was like, I'm really scared for her because she has tied her lifeboat to a person like Mattson. And the next episode, it's already like the chickens are coming home to roost. Mattson is very erratic, and he's been lying. And Kendall, of course, is like, oh, I knew he was a bullshitter the whole time. Like, of course, yeah, Mattson is. Most of these people are, and it's not exactly surprising. And it is so Mattson to get this information brought to him by Shiv and him be like, whatever. Like, who cares?
Yeah.
But this is a big deal, and this certainly seems like it's going to tank the deal.
Yeah. I just got to say, just to do a little bit of self promo here on the podcast real quick, if that's all right with just you and me and all of our friends here, if you go to postshowrecaps.com/THR right now, we'll take you to my author page, and top of the list as of this current moment in time, just a little old interview with Alexander Skarsgård with your boy, Josh Wigler. A really fun time talking to the erstwhile Eric Northman and Lucas Mattson. Eric Northman still goes first for me. Really fun conversation with him about this episode. I thought Skarsgård had a lot of interesting insights into playing Mattson, where I do think that he sort of refutes the idea that's put forth in this episode that he's just some kind of a PR Frankenstein creation that isn't even a coder and didn't even do anything real and just kind of showed up with a box of parts and got, gazillion dollars out of it. But he also, I think, acknowledges that Mattson has this tendency to, for somebody who's so interested in other people's weaknesses, Grace, I think he's pretty blind to his own. And there is this sort of juvenile quality about Mattson, schoolyard bully tactics that are alive and well in this guy really actively available to us as viewers in that scene between him and Kendall. What were your takes on Matsson showing up at the party and what we've learned about him in this one?
Just first of all, I wanted to have to remember that his name in True Blood is Eric Northman, and that was not you making up the name of the titular character of the 2022 movie The Northman.
No, but I do believe his name is Eric as well. Yeah, it's with a K at the end.
Yeah. Anyway, forgot his name was Eric Northman in True Blood. That's great.
Yeah.
No, I
his middle name was The.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. I actually do think, as much as I feel like this felt very, wheel spinning is the wrong word, because the wheels are like, we're reversing and turning around and we're doing U-turns, like, because this is like the deal's on and then it's off. Like the Michael Scott, like snip, snap, snip, snap. I feel like we're getting that.
Yeah.
But with the deal of like, now we're full on like, Waystar Royko's going to acquire Gojo is where we end up by the end of the
reverse
episode.
Viking.
It's the reverse Viking.
That's what Shiv and Tom did last night.
Oh, Jess.
Wow. But I did think
that was part of the Orgasm Olympics. That was one of the events. Was the reverse Viking?
That's why she checked if his
and they both won.
Yeah. Cool. Gold medals for everyone.
I completely lost my train of thought, but it's okay. I'll get back to it. Which is, I did think this was kind of interesting of him coming to the party and trying to schmooze, and it seems like he's doing a good job. I do think him trying to rush the deal is potentially something that's been on the table the whole season, and nobody has really clocked exactly why he's trying to rush the deal, and that certainly comes true this episode. I mean, and also the idea that he was not going to come to this party, and this information probably doesn't leak, if not for Siobhan, saying you need to come and schmooze all these people, only for Ebba to also come and spill the beans that the India numbers are inflated. Yeah. I did really like the Kendall Matsson conversation, especially because like they both are kind of calling each other on their BS, but it does seem like Kendall has bigger BS on Matsson than Matsson has on, like, he's like, those are projections, they're projections, but you're trying to claim real numbers in this deal. And I feel like Frank's reaction, I do love Kendall saying, how about some Kenny and Frank?
Kenny and Frankie.
Kenny and Frankie.
Coming to Netflix.
Frankie's I would love a Grace and Frankie.
That could be you hanging out with Frank.
Yeah. His reaction to the fact that the India numbers are bad seems really bad for Matsson. That's like my biggest clue that's not good, because Frank is petrified in that moment in the coat check.
No. Yes, I think that's a real tell, because it doesn't feel like Frank's really got too much skin in the game anymore. He seems like he's fine. When he finds out he's on the kill list, he's like, oh, okay, and he figures he's got a lot of money coming his way. But when he hears that in this coat room scene towards the end of the episode with Kendall, I do agree, Grace. I think that Frank going white as a sheet, General Franco, turning this shade of pale, Jess, that is a really bad sign, probably, as far as like someone, if we're looking at any of these people as an adult in the room, Frank is probably close.
Right.
For him to be that nervous is a big deal.
Yeah, the suits, right? Frank, Carl, and Jerry, I think we can usually believe their reactions and like trust their reactions.
But even like Carl is so like openly compromised.
Yeah.
And Jerry has like, an appetite for the power as well. Frank, it really often just feels like, Kenny, you're doing so well. He doesn't seem like he cares so much.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is, Grace, like you mentioned, if not for Shiv making Matsson come, this information probably doesn't leak, but it's actually better for her that it leaks than to find out later after they've been acquired and after she's working for Matsson. And Matsson just comes up to her and he's like, hey, can you fix it?
Can you fix India? Yeah.
But the problem is, like you said, I think it's only a matter of time until the information leaks that Shiv has been working with Matsson to her brothers, and like that's a whole can of worms, right? So like that's going to be a big problem as well. And I think it's just going back to like the Shiv and Tom of it all, and the fight is, his argument is like, you're fine, like your name is fine. I'm the one who's screwed. Like there's 0% chance that her brothers don't bring her back into the fold. It's the game they all play, and they all respect that they're all playing the game together.
Yeah, I think like a really good point in favor of that argument is back at the Honeymoon States episode when they're finally talking things through and Roman is making the case for himself. He's like, and actually, and this is probably not the right time to bring it up, but I may or may not have been talking with Dad more than you guys know, and all this stuff. And like, no one batted an eye. I do think, depending on the severity of, how much further this escalates with Shiv, there's still a world where by the end of this episode, at the very least, they're all on the same page about F Tom. That guy sucks. Can they get back to a similar page? Kendall has gotten over the letter that Shiv wrote in season 3. Like,
Kendall did say, I love my siblings, but I'm not in love with them.
He did say that.
Which is fair. That's a fair thing to say.
You're in love with your siblings. I have a different HBO show to recommend.
Sure. He loves his siblings, but he is not in love with his siblings, is what Kendall says. And he also mentions Grace. I believe that he says that it's there's only one crown. Yeah. One king, one crown.
One king, one crown. Yeah. I do think it's kind of interesting to look at the trajectory. And again, like, it's been so up and down for each person. But I feel like this is I think this is 2 episodes in a row that it's not very good for Roman. Roman's freak out is really not good on Connor, although it's against Connor. But I feel like, and he has the argument with Jerry, which I'm sure we'll get into. Shiv, I feel like, also again has not a great episode, and Ken's on the rise. But I'm like, that feels to me like that can't last until the end because of how quickly things have shifted. But I don't really know what the outcome of this whole thing is, but it kind of feels like at the moment like none of them are going to end up in like any successful position by the end. But
can I pitch something that I think just based on what we saw at the very beginning of the episode, right? There is a quote that Kendall says that, like, literally you close your eyes and it's Logan saying it. And so he says, he's having this argument with Rava, and he says, I'm breaking my back, and it's all for them, talking about his children, to make the world safe. That is such a Logan quote. I'm starting to come around to the fact that, like, it could be Kendall at the top of the end of the show, and it's just that it's at what cost.
And what did you get? Yeah.
What? I think that's where we're leaning. I mean, we're episode 7 out of 10.
And not to like, I'm not dunking on anyone. I'm not playing with anybody, but he said it. It makes sense dramaturgically. I really do think so.
Yeah, I agree.
I really do think so. And I think that this episode does not really alter the power dynamics as far as what they've been for the past couple of episodes now, I think.
Just Shiv is in a worse position than she was before.
Well, yeah, she's in a worse position potentially. But if Matsson is able to win the deal and get the train back on track the way he says, like, maybe not. Maybe she is in an okay spot. So, I mean, all of them are in, potentially, they're all standing in a minefield, right? One false move and they blow up. So it's hard to say. Now, I thought that maybe you were going to pitch a different direction, Jess, that I felt like the person who probably rises in the highest estimation in anyone's book on the Roy side of the line in this episode is cousin Greg, the Slim Reaper, who reveals himself in this episode. We've come a long way, Grace, from Greg firing Carrie. He is now firing hundreds of people at once.
Yeah, he's on a firing spree. I did think the show is like, I feel like getting closer and closer to as the weeks have gone on, to be like, just so you all know, Greg's not great. And this episode, I believe Matsson says, you're a bad guy. And he says, I'm not a bad guy.
I'm not a bad guy.
He gets picked by HR. HR says I'm a good person for the job because it looks like I care, but I don't.
Yeah, but I don't. And he tells Matsson, I am a good guy. I just, you got to do what you got to do. To which Matsson responds, do you though? Just,
that's coming from Matsson.
Yeah, but you have Matsson questioning the moral character of
Oscar, that guy's in Vikings and he's not a good dude. So I need to tell what's not going to be
spit on Greg and called him a dingleberry.
Yeah. I, on the other hand, love parties, is what Oscar says. Oscar, he's telling like Greg to buzz off. You're a dingleberry, Greg. And then by the end, when Matsson gets pulled in to talk to Shiv, Oscar loves Greg. The butcher with a smile is
when
what
they're calling for Ebba as she's leaving. Like, he's he just weasels his way in.
He does. He's
So-
good at it.
So, I mean, I do think that there is a world where should this thing slip away from Kendall and Roman and even Shiv and fall into Mattson's hands, and Tom is, on his way out the door too, that the person who stands to stick around the most, I think right now for me, the seeds have been planted probably along the way, but like we're starting to see some actual plants sprout out in the form of Greg and Mattson scenes in this episode. I think if you're somebody who is invested in Greg as a successful character in the context of these people finding success anyway on this show, by the end of it, I think this episode was probably pretty good for you if you're a big Greg person.
I feel like potentially the thing for Greg there is the link with Tom and Kendall, which I think is interesting because Kendall, so Tom ends the episode. He gets the last look. We love a face shot, the one singular cam face shot. This time it's Tom in bed. But I do feel like there are some seeds. And I know Kendall says F Tom, but I feel like one of the most memorable lines for me of the show is Tom saying to Kendall, like, I've never seen your dad get effed. And if Kendall's becoming his dad, I feel like there could, and he's like, he's told him a lot. I like you, right? He says that at the wake. I do feel like, if we want like one full betrayal, one more from the way that Ken screws over Shiv, and it would really echo the argument this episode as well, is like, you took the last 6 months of my dad from me. Like this idea that like Kendall and Tom would end up being like just Tom ends up with Kendall, who's the new Logan. And not that like Shiv and Kendall's relationship is the same, but it might feel the same sort of like, come on, we said F him but like you are too power hungry and you're too much like our dad. And now you've like, you're willing to work with him, even though he's completely awful to me. I don't know. I could see something. I feel like there has been hints that like Tom actually lingering around in whatever version of whatever Kendall might be building could be there potentially.
Yeah. Let's talk about Roman and Jerry. I could have gotten you there, but nope. Nope, Jess.
Yeah, it's brutal. Roman obviously handles this terribly. We all knew he was going to. It's so unsurprising to me that Roman immediately is like, oh, we should like roll that back. That wasn't serious, Jerry. And he has a purse full of apologies that mean nothing. We love to see one person on the show you do not want to mess with. It is Jerry. You don't mess with Jerry. The stands will come and get you. And Jerry is just like, you know what? I have a whole PR team. I'm going to get oodles and oodles of money. You mess with my narrative. I have all your DPs and I'm ready to release them. I loved seeing Jerry like this. And obviously Roman looks just devastated, probably on a few different levels here. But he had it coming. Like, you can't just go around firing people and not expect, especially at the high levels at which Joy and Jerry were, and not expect to have blowback or some kind of repercussions from them all. Oh, Dad just fires people all the time.
Yeah.
It's just like,
feeling
come
fiery.
on, Roman.
He was just feeling fiery. He was just feeling fiery. Roman continues, I think, to feel a bit of this sort of he's like circling the drain. I think he's not really adding too much to the equation. He finds out about the blood bricks, and neither he nor Kendall really bat an eye, I should say.
Nope.
So, okay, there's that. But that's really what he brings to the equation. Then I think everything that they get out of Ebba seems largely from Kendall's side of the line. I don't know if you all see it differently. But I think Roman is especially frustrated in this episode when he's trying to operate on behalf of Mencken and get Connor to drop out of the election because his continued existence in the election is threatening Mencken's chances. And so they want him to drop because he's endangering him, I think, in 4 states, if I caught that right. Were those the honeymoon states? I don't know.
Well, maybe.
But he wants him to drop out, and he's willing to offer him an ambassadorship to somewhere that doesn't have nukes, which is offensive to Connor. But Roman isn't able to turn this for Mencken, and Connor is resistant, and Roman gets really nasty with Connor. And I feel like when Roman gets that level of nasty with family, that's typically when something is really wrong with Rome.
Yeah, it reminds me almost of like the Kendall Too Much Birthday episode with the jacket.
Yeah.
Of, like, just take off your jacket, man. Just take it off.
That's also Roman pushes Ken in that episode. I feel like there's this meanness that comes out.
He's just very frustrated that Connor isn't like, take the deal. This is a good deal. Like, take the carrot, not the stick, right? And Connor just isn't willing. Connor is never someone that's like, you can't reach him with logic most of the time.
You really can't reason with Connor Roy. And I'm sure he would be thrilled to hear, because he's just bested you in intellectual debate every single time.
Love, what is this Pierce's name who's hanging around? My liege.
My liege.
My liege.
Yeah, my liege. Whoa. No one knows what's in North Korea. That's the whole point. So
but
I think,
You
Roman's
have to shout out the Willa Connor relationship being like the most functioning and loving of all of the relationship on the show, which is sad and scary at the same time. But Willa does come to his defense. And gosh, you have to love Connor when he stands up. And I was like, is he going to get physical with Roman? Just told him to tell his wife to shut the F up. And Connor loves Willa. And he stands up and he says, she's the only one who takes me seriously in this entire room. I'm going to listen to her. Come on, Willa. And they leave. And I was like, props to Connor for that. That was great.
Yeah. Connor manages, I think. Connor, of the four siblings, to me, it's really not even a competition about who is doing the best, like who is the most sort of grounded of the four siblings, of who is reacting to the unexpected tragic death of their parent, with the most grounded reaction. I think that is Connor by a lot. And this is the dude who is running for president without a real shot. And that's the grounded one, Grace. That's the one who isn't just moonwalking right now.
I kind of love the fact that Connor brings up so he's been going to visit his dad every day, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And then who's going to speak
brings him comfort.
Connor says that he would do it, but I think also it's kind of hilarious that he knows that they're never going to let him do it. Like,
it's the same as when he's on the yacht and he offers to be fired or go down for the whole cruise scandal, and they're like, "No, Connor, it's fine. It's not for you."
Yeah, very funny. The whole thing is very funny. The scene where they're talking about whether they're going to live in Oman, he's trying to pitch Willa on it. He's like, "We'll live on a compound, but we'll walk right through the airport." It's like, and she's reading the tweets about how
drive on the sidewalk if you want.
Yeah, the Sultan has an oppressive hold over the country. It's just we can park wherever we want.
Yeah, she says running people over isn't a perk though. Like that's not.
That's fair. That's fair. No, I really did love Connor in this episode, but boy, this feels not good for Roman. But then I'm also just holding out hope that like it's not close enough to the end of the season for this to be like the last note of Roman Roy. But I really feel like it would be such a hard walk back to be like, this is the guy who will run the company. They feel like such big F-ups in these last few episodes.
Big F-ups.
Big F-ups.
Big F-ups.
Big F-ups.
He does apologize for not going on stage with Kendall, but
and sorry for being wibbly wobbly there.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, apologies on the old wibble wobble.
Yeah. But it's not. This feels not good. These feels like too big F-ups to be able to redeem and be running a company.
It always felt to me like the only way he'd ever get there would be under the apprenticeship of not only his father but Jerry. And so without those two around by his side, he's kind of nothing. And I love Roman as a character. So this is not like against him as a character, it's like against his business acumen. Like it's just not there. He maybe has like a gut instinct for certain things, but he lacks so much of the polish and the actual knowledge and business acumen to get by. And you could see that so blatantly clear, on top of the fact that he is still grieving. We're not that far out, let's remember, from Logan's death. He's still spiraling internally. He's not scheduling grief sessions for himself in open offices. Like he's lashing out at people when they don't do what he wants. And so I just don't see how he's going to be able to recover in time for him to be at the top by the end of the season.
Is it possible that in the final episode, it's just like an hour long, and I heard it's actually 90 minutes, the finale, a 90-minute ad for like ZipRecruiter, where they're like, did you guys know there's other jobs than the CEO of Waystar Royco? Yeah. And they all go do other jobs that they're better suited for. I don't
Now,
know what those are, but
if you watch that 90-minute commercial of a series finale on PSR Living Plus, you actually get 0 minutes because there's no commercials at all. So consider it. Sign up. Patreon.com/post show recaps. I think that the Roman offering to be the guy who does the things at the funeral feels like a bad.
Oh, yeah.
It's gonna be
thing.
bad.
That feels like a bad thing. Doesn't feel like a next episode thing. The next episode is America Decides. Preview makes it look like we're going to do the election. It's the next day. So probably going to be there. And that either, I mean, look, it goes, the speech that Roman gives at his father's funeral really does, like, the tenor of it, the tone of it, the version of Roman Roy we get largely depends on the outcome of this presidential election.
Right.
Should say, I feel like the implications there are at least lightly implied that it could be bad. Could be bad. I am nervous for that. I'm nervous.
Feels like he's most back to horse in this race. It feels like, yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. Like Kendall doesn't want anything to do with Mencken, and Rome is the one that's like, yeah, well, what if he wins? And Scott's like, okay, yeah, sure. So Roman really is Team Mencken in a big way. Yeah, that'll be interesting. Interesting to see how all of that shakes out. Gosh, I'm still pretty worked up about the Tom and Shiv thing. Like, I feel like we could spend even more time on the Tom and Shiv balcony fight. This is one of those moments that I think you wait an entire series for, and then it pops off. And Grace, I think I'm vibing a bit with, like, for you, it's almost like, I don't know how I felt about that, right? I think I don't want to put words in your mouth.
It's a thing where it's like so jarring when you first see
Yes.
it, because it's not because they are just saying exactly what they need to say. And like, I get your point, just that, like, yeah, there's been weird episodes this season of, like, Logan dying, but even in that, and, like, yes, the phone calls while they're like, dad is like, that also felt like, I'm like, whoa, this is weird. Like, I'm like in a little bit of shock. So when I'm watching it for the first time, I think it's an excellently well acted scene. I think that there's I do think the line about maybe you shouldn't be a mom, I think, just we were talking right before we went on air, that I do think him raising the point, like, I do think it was such an unloading for both of them of the things that they've done to harm each other. So he's saying, like, you don't want to have my baby. I guess, like, it's the wrong way to say that she's harming him by doing that, but, like, he is being open about how he wants to have kids and she doesn't want to have kids and all of these things. I did feel like that one line felt so on the nose for a season of the show where, like, we all know that Shiv is pregnant, but he doesn't know. It's like, maybe you shouldn't be a mom. It feels a little, like, too cute. And I'm just so used to the writing being, like, so impeccable on the show, I think. But yeah, I do think it's just a jar, because they are just litigating all of the things. This is the conversation he wanted to have at the beginning of the season, right? Where he says, I want to talk about all the things, do the math on our marriage.
Yeah, and he wants to do it privately, right? It's
Right.
just the two of them in Mondale at home.
Right.
And here it ends up becoming
Technically, it is at their home.
It is at their home, but there's,
Yeah.
at least 40 of the most important people in America in their triplex right now. And so it takes on this, like, operatic quality. It just becomes so performative in a way. And they're lucky that, as we said, no one could hear their argument. I think it is so jarring that it is the kind of thing that multiple viewings of this will make it feel like less jarring and more just, like, impressive in the performance. And I think even the dialogue in there, I think, is so savage, and it's just, we're not used to seeing this level of intense, sharp honesty between the two of them towards each other in this volume. And so I do think it's, like, it's unsettling, and that's sort of the feeling that I think we should be feeling right now. I think future viewings of this, I wouldn't be surprised if that turns the equation for some people.
Yeah, I think the reason I was so okay with it, even from the very beginning of it, is, like, it feels relatable, and, like, people have had these fights before where Tom is very much like, okay, I get it. I won't say I'm tired anymore. Like, we're done. It's fine. We don't need to talk about it. But she keeps pushing him. She keeps needling him. And so he finally is just like, fine. Do you want to have this conversation right now? Is this where you want to have this conversation? And then it just kind of gets the ball rolling. And I think that once you've opened those doors, it's like toothpaste is out of the tube. You can't go back. And so for it to escalate to that level made sense to me. I do agree with you, Grace, of like I said this pre-pod, kind of like square peg in a square hole, like so perfect. That line so perfectly fits the situation that it feels a little off. Whereas I didn't mind him saying like, you never wanted to have my kids, because we did see that. We saw that in season 3. That was a very active storyline that was going on. So it did feel a little bit, and maybe it's one of those things that maybe if we want to brush it off as like I'm going to say the thing that I know is the most possibly painful thing for me to say to you right now, because he knows her relationship with her mother. He knows how much she despises her mother and how she didn't think she was very maternal towards her. And we all know Shiv has that deep-seated fear. And so maybe we could brush it off as like he's going to say the thing that's going to hurt her the most. But it really was like, I've been waiting. I mean, I don't know about you all, but like when we saw the very beginning of the season, we see that kind of like this season on Succession, where it's like, they show you all clips from the whole season. And as soon as Shiv stepped on that balcony, I was like, oh, it's happening. It's happening. Yeah. It's happening, everyone. Like, I knew this was the moment, and I've been waiting for this to happen. And so I think for me, I was kind of okay with it, because I was like, yes, air the dirty laundry, like yell at each other. They need to get this all out. So maybe that's why I was a bit more forgiving of the scene.
I think what does work about the scene, what I do like about it from the construction of it, is that I do feel like so many of their conversations, why I find them very frustrating and actually don't want them to be together, is because like we talked about last week, them being honest, but also like Shiv lies to him at the end, right? Where it's like, I'll follow you anywhere for love, Tom Wambsgans, right? But she's lying. Yeah. And in this one, what I like is that they're both basically unburdening them. So they both feel like they're like struggling with these things that they actually haven't really said out loud. So Tom's saying, you were going to send me to prison. And she says, you said you would go to prison, and you stole 6 months from my father from me, and he's like, I think you find it hard to think about me. Like they really are unburdening all the things that they have wanted to say that they have been struggling with in this relationship, because they don't actually speak to each other. So I do like it from that perspective.
Yeah. And I do think too, like, again, the subtleties of the performance it's going to be more rewarding on a rewatch, but I could feel like looking at Matthew McFadden's face when Shiv says like, you stole 6 months of my father from me, you could see the kind of realization of like, oh, you've been holding that against me. And like, but that's not my fault. Like, I'm sorry that your dad died, but it's not my fault. Like, you can see the kind of clicking in his brain that like, that's something she's been holding against Tom this whole time. To me, it seems that way. Maybe she's saying it in the moment, but like, I feel like she truly feels that way.
Josh, I thought the best dialogue there was when he says, I'm sorry your father never accepted you, but I've been showering you with acceptance. I was like, oh yeah, that's their whole relationship, right? Like it's just not who she wants acceptance from.
Do you believe him when he says, because at one point he says like, I loved you. And she said, no, you wanted my DNA. You wanted my power, the power of my family, which he did say last episode. But I think both are true. Like, I do truly believe Tom loves Shiv.
I do believe that. I also do believe that Shiv loves Tom. I think that there are powerful emotions between the two of these people, and Shiv is I think that a lot of like the defensive mechanisms are in full display. Otherwise, she would not be as upset with Tom as she is, I feel like. So there is a powerful connection between these two. Whether or not that means that they should be together is a totally separate thing.
Oh, they're monstrous for each other.
I think that they do both love the version of themselves that they pretended to be for a long time, right? Yeah. Like that's the version that when they were playing, that role, like the roles for each other, I think that they do, and I feel like, you can be like, well, they love the idea of that person, but it's like when you're like in a marriage, in a relationship, it does, like, those lines I think would probably blur a lot of like, I love the person you're trying to like, you're like, I've molded you to be. They both molded each other, because at the beginning, Tom thought that Shiv would let Tom be the CEO, right? Yeah. And Shiv thought that Tom would just placate to everything he wanted. And once they both realized, like, I don't want to do that, they kind of fall out of love with each other.
And he gave her a scorpion. Like, Tom, I love you. But that was not what I was expecting when she got. I'm thinking like a watch, a necklace, a jewelry.
I thought it was going to be the watch that he gave Logan.
Again,
yeah. But no, it was a scorpion in like a glass thing. And I'm like, this is so supremely insulting. Like, is he trying to insinuate like he's the frog and she's the
Yeah.
scorpion and like the
Yeah.
scorpion and the frog?
Yeah.
It's terrible. No one wants to be
Yeah.
called a scorpion.
Yeah, they both think that they're Kermit here. But you know, they might just both be Miss Piggy. It's possible.
Oh no.
It's possible. Okay, we've got some feedback to get into live here as we are going. If you are joining us live, feel free to write in the comments. This is from Robin while we are on the subject. What's a better joke, Tom being fired or the scorpion?
The scorpion. Because public humiliation is always worse.
Yeah, public
Yeah, that's
humiliation
probably right.
can be difficult. Let's see. Let's keep going on the Tom and Shiv. This is from Angie. Angie had thought, I was afraid Tom was going to jump off the balcony at the end of this episode. Gosh, I was a little nervous about that as well, Grace. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it would have been quite the stunner at the end of the tailgate party. I don't know that we're getting another death this season, so
Yeah,
I'm maybe not super worried about it, but yeah, certainly.
Yeah,
that-
my husband
that-
thought the same thing, but the shot did linger on him for a second. I didn't ever think he was gonna jump, but he did look really sad.
I didn't think maybe he was just gonna like melt into the bed.
Yeah.
Just like mortified that he just like shakes free of his physical plane. It was a rough night for Tom Wamsgams.
I did like when he realizes that people aren't taking him seriously, that they need to go home.
Yeah.
And he goes, "No, seriously, you all
Like,
need to
leave.
go.
Get the F
Get your
out.
coat,
Yeah.
get your F out." Yeah.
Yes. Well, even if he is not actually dead, Scarl writes in and says, R.I.P. Shiv Tom Hive. We had a good week. Flags at half mast.
Oh.
I feel that energy.
Yeah, that's not where the flags were during the Olympics. Is all I'll say. Domenica writes in and says that Matthew and Sarah scene, is that some of the best acting we've ever seen on the show? Still recovering. Where does this rank as far as the Tom and Shiv scenes for you, Jess, or at least in terms of the Matthew McFadden and Sarah Snook performances?
Without doing a rewatch yet, like without having seen that scene multiple times, I would say probably to me, I still think I really love the scene of them in the cove, where he's saying, I think the sad I am without you is less than the sad I am with you. I still think that might be higher for me just because it's so layered, but I have to this scene is definitely top 3 moments for me for Tom and Shiv.
Was there music? Because I remember that scene in episode 1 of season 4 is really, really good. I really like last week's scene in the bedroom as well. They've had some really good scenes together.
There's the behind the scenes on this episode is really fun, and they're talking about how they were just out on that balcony, just like bellowing at each other, and that's a really fun thing to do is to scream your head off at somebody that you trust and is going to do it back at you. And Sarah Snook tells this funny story about when Matthew McFadden has the line of, "You were going to send me to effing prison," that the word prison just bellowed across New York City over and over again. So Skarsgård in our interview talked about how filming this episode was really fun. It was just like a week or whatever of night shoots here in the apartment. So I get the sense that this was a fun one for them to film. A couple more perspectives on this scene in particular. I think it's really probably going to be one of the biggest things that we're talking about all week long. This was from Emily. Emily said, I loved the balcony scene. It was so needed. But Rachel agrees with you, Grace. Rachel says, agree with Grace. Usually the writing is subtle, but some of the dialogue on the balcony was too on the nose. And I want to give shouts to Domenica here, who says, as someone who lost a parent recently, that line of him costing her 6 months with her father hit me in the throat. Our condolences, Domenica, and anyone else who is going through something similar. So yeah, I think a lot of different perspectives on this scene. I think that coming out of Tailgate Party, we're going to be talking about Tom and Shiv on many, 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 many podcasts all week long, Jess.
I mean, I'm going to watch, if I don't watch this episode 6 times, I'm going to watch that scene at the very least 6 times.
Yeah.
Because there's so much layering there and it escalates so quickly that I need to catch every little thing, every jab they threw, as much as it hurts for me to watch.
Yes.
I love them.
Let's do one last one. This is from Emily, who says, Tom saying it's bedtime for bonzos is such a Midwest thing. Or at least that's what my Midwest mom says all the time.
Sticks points out in the chat that is a Ronald Reagan movie, Bedtime for Bonzo, where he takes care of a monkey, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe that's consistent. Maybe consistent with Time Wom's games. All right. Well,
It's a Reagan with tweaks.
that's it. Reagan with tweaks. Got him off the rack. Off the rack. Bedtime.
We're gonna keep it a tight 90. We don't want a
yeah.
3-day griefathon.
Off the rack ways to say goodnight. Well, we now shall say goodnight to all of you here. Of course, this is just our first shot at Tailgate Party. We are going to have more podcasts coming your way all week long, beginning with the deep dive from Grace and Dr. Amanda and Alexander Skarsgård Chester showing up on the deep dive as well. I'll get together with Rob. I'll do verses with Latanya, and then we're going to do the wrap-up show at the end of the week. YouTube.com/post-show recaps if you want to subscribe there and make sure you get to watch the video versions of these podcasts live when we do them. But also we've got the VOD, so you can always go back and check it out. YouTube.com/post-show recaps. If you want the commercial-free versions of the pod, Patreon.com/post-show recaps is the way to do that. That's Patreon.com/post-show recaps. I'm at Round Howard, wherever you can find me. Jess, where can people find you?
At the Jess Sterling.
And Grace.
At Hi from Grace.
All right, folks, we will be back with more Succession coverage imminently. Until then, F off. Bedtime for bonzos. Bye.